On the first day I returned to the country, I noticed that there was a new face in the house, a pale, delicate girl around my age. But the moment we met, she timidly lowered her head, looking as though I'd bullied her. I frowned and called for my housekeeper, Maureen Morris. Is the job market really that tough this year that you're letting just any riffraff in through the door now? Fire her immediately. She looks so miserable she'll jinx my luck. Maureen awkwardly wiped the sweat off her forehead. Miss Slater, she's not the new maid. She's a guest brought home by Mr. Atwood. I gave the pale, delicate girl a once-over, my disdain growing even more pronounced. Has his taste really sunk this low that he'll stoop to anything now? When those words left my mouth, my stepfather, Bernard Atwood, happened to be coming down the stairs. His expression immediately darkened, and he snapped at me in embarrassment and anger. Lucille Slater, what's gotten into you? How dare you speak of me like that? This is Gwen Herman, an orphan our family used to sponsor. She got into college in Clamdale, so she's staying here for a while. She's hardworking and driven. I've officially adopted her. From now on, you're her older sister. So, you'd better treat her well, do you hear me? I flashed a smile at him. Does Mom know about this? A flicker of discomfort crossed his face. There's no need to bother your mother with such a small matter. I'll tell her when she gets back from her business trip. I couldn't be bothered to deal with them, so I gave a non-committal hum. But just as I turned to go upstairs, Gwen grabbed my wrist. She timidly met my gaze, her lashes fluttering. Lucille, I know you probably don't like me, but I hope we can get along in the days ahead. Please don't give Dad a hard time. I didn't say anything because the moment we touched, I suddenly heard her inner thoughts. How dare this stupid, villainous side character call me a maid? Just wait until I unlock my protagonist arc and become the family's sweetheart. Then, I'll slap that smug look right off your face. I'll ruin your family and make you homeless. Let's see if you can still be so arrogant then. I looked at her face, which bore a 70% resemblance to Bernard's, and smiled. Where did an illegitimate daughter like her get the audacity to act so arrogantly? The next second, I raised my hand and slapped her hard across the face. Everyone froze. Bernard was the first to snap out of it. He rushed over and tried to hit me. You ungrateful brat. You really think you can do whatever you want? His raised hand hadn't even come down when I reached out and seized his wrist. When I met his hate-filled gaze, I couldn't help but smirk indifferently. Just because I call you Dad, you actually think you're my father? How cute, my dear stepdad. Everyone said I was the most vicious heiress in the city's elite circle because I was ruthless and would stop at nothing to get whatever I set my sights on. If I hated someone, I made sure they didn't have it easy. But 10 years ago, I was just a timid little girl. Back then, right after my 8th birthday, I got into a terrible car accident with my biological father, Gordon Slater. In that critical moment, he shielded me with his body, and that was how I survived. It was just that from that day on, I no longer had a father. My mother, Sheila Plummer, was a career-driven powerhouse. After the accident, she sat silently by my father's grave for 3 days, then she single-handedly took on the entire family business. My stepfather, Bernard, came into our lives shortly after. In front of Mom, he acted gentle and patient with me. He'd pat my head and buy me the stuffed toys I liked. Lucille, how about I become your father from now on and protect you? But once, when Mom was away on a business trip and I had a high fever with convulsions in the middle of the night, I overheard him talking on the phone with someone by the door. Can you find out how to make someone get brain damage from a fever? In that instant, a chill seized my heart. And it was also then that I suddenly regained my memories of being a villainess. I realized that everything I'd suffered was just the backstory the author had set up to make me turn evil. The real female lead was Gwen, the biological daughter of Bernard and his first love. When I turned 18, Gwen would move into my home and win over other male leads to become the darling of Clamdale's elite circle. In the end, she'd scheme to kill me and Mom, allowing Bernard to become the true head of the Slater family. And she'd take my place as the real heiress, enjoying a happy life as everyone's sweetheart.
But why?
Why did I have to play second fiddle to someone? Why did Dad have to die just so Bernard could join my family? Why did Mom and I have to meet our ends just to pave the way for Gwen? I refused to accept it. Thus, I changed completely after that day. Since the book said I was a villainess, I'd be vicious to the very end. Take now, for example, I swung my hand back and slapped Bernard right across the face. I smiled as I looked at the terrified duo and said, "Sorry, my hand was itching. I'm heading upstairs now, Gwen." Perhaps the slap from our first meeting was too harsh, because I barely saw them around the house over the next few days. One day, I received a phone call. The moment I answered, a man's amused voice came from the other end. "Miss Slater, what's going on with you? Your stepfather and his adopted daughter have been attending all sorts of banquets these past few days. Aren't you worried she'll start building connections with others?" I examined the lovely, striking face staring back at me in the mirror. Only after confirming that my makeup was flawless for the occasion did I smile. Why should I be worried? If she can land those connections, more power to her. You, on the other hand, don't forget what you're supposed to do at Mrs. Strickland's charity gala tonight. The man on the other end chuckled lightly. If you're so worried about me, why not come and see for yourself? Come downstairs. You can't miss tonight's show. Sure enough, the moment I went downstairs, I saw Logan Kennedy waiting for me on the couch. His features were sharp, with deep-set eyes, and his impeccably tailored black suit only accentuated his tall, graceful frame. When he saw me, a bright smile spread across his face. "It's been a while, my master." After awakening to my memories of being a villainess, the first person I sought out was Logan Kennedy, the novel's primary antagonist. Back then, he was just a scrawny boy covered in bruises. Even though he was only 12 years old, he was forced to peddle hot dogs outside the school gates by his adoptive father, Melvin Cohen. Each hot dog sold for $3, and if he didn't make $300 a day, he'd be viciously beaten in the street. The first time I met Logan, he had just been beaten by Melvin. He was filthy and lay wounded in the alley. In fact, he looked no different from a stray dog. In the original story, he'd eventually kill Melvin and use the latter's assets to catapult himself into becoming a rising star in the industry. Later, when Gwen and the male lead, Quentin Kennedy, were happily entangled in their romance, Logan would discover that he was actually the true heir of the Kennedy family. With a tragic childhood and parents who favored others over him, poor Logan would completely descend into darkness. Unfortunately, Gwen and Quentin found the evidence of Melvin's murder later, and the story's greatest antagonist would ultimately end up in prison. However, none of that would happen now because I was here. I looked at the boy curled up on the ground, barely clinging to life, and disdainfully nudged the back of his hand with my foot. "Hey, do you want to get back at the man who hurt you?" Logan spat out a mouthful of blood and looked up at me with alarmingly bright eyes. "Yes." A vicious smile curled on my lips as I lazily tilted his chin up with the toe of my shoe. "Then become my lapdog, and I'll give you everything you want." Logan lowered his head and fell silent. Just as I grew impatient and was about to turn away, he reached out and grabbed my ankle. Woof. From then on, Logan became my most devoted lapdog. I hired a lawyer to sue Melvin for trafficking and child abuse, then took Logan along to witness the moment Melvin was arrested. I didn't keep idle hands around, so I took the initiative to ask Mom to send Logan to the best school in Clamdale. Mom didn't think much of me bringing home some random child. She simply patted my head and transferred another $3 million into my account. "As long as you're happy, you can do whatever you want." During that time, I kept Logan in one of the villas under my name. Since I couldn't stand to see him comfortable, I took twisted pleasure in crafting a study plan for him that was even more demanding than my own. It was a pity he was so messed up that he actually thrived on it. Nourished by money, Logan no longer bore any trace of the boy he once was. He'd become refined, composed, and unnervingly calm. Even when I told him about his fate in the original story, his expression remained unchanged as he knelt on the floor, washing my feet. I disdainfully kicked him in the chest, splashing water at him, leaving his shirt soaked. "Don't you feel any resentment? That fake heir stole the wealthy life that should have been yours." The tips of Logan's ears turned red, but instead of getting angry, he lowered his head and reverently pressed a kiss to the top of my foot. "I'd rather stay here as your lapdog than go back now to fight him to the death." He could think again, as I had no intention of letting Quentin keep strutting around. That was why I sent Logan back to the Kennedy family 2 years ago. Logan didn't disappoint me. He was the antagonist in the original story who, despite never having received a higher education, could still hold his own against Quentin in the business world. Now, after years of careful cultivation on my part, he was already showing signs of surpassing Quentin shortly after returning home. In fact, Quentin had apparently botched a project a couple of days ago. Rumor had it he was so anxious that he'd started taking medication. Just thinking about Quentin possibly losing sleep from the stress made me smile. I tilted Logan's chin up and pressed a kiss to his lips. Good boy. Don't let me down. Emily Kaufman, or rather, Mrs. Strickland, was hosting her charity gala at her beachfront villa. By the time we arrived, Gwen had already been ushered into the venue by Bernard. In just a few days, she had acquired some new jewelry. Her makeup was still understated and elegant, but the white gown she wore was clearly a haute couture piece. It was clear that over these past few days, Bernard had been doing his best to compensate Gwen materially. At that moment, she was chatting with a young man in a wheelchair. He was strikingly handsome with pale skin and the air of a delicate, sickly beauty. The two of them were laughing and talking clearly on familiar terms. But when Gwen looked up and saw me, the smile on her face stiffened noticeably. Lucille, what brings you here? I sauntered over to her and gave her an unabashed once-over. What's the matter? Aren't you happy to see me? She dropped her head, not daring to meet my eyes. No, I was just surprised. After all, you never come to events like this. I merely studied her pitiful, fragile appearance with a faint, knowing smile. How amusing. This so-called delicate heroine was furious and cursed me inwardly for ruining her plans. Crap, it's that villainess again. She's completely insane. She even hit her own stepfather. She's a psycho, all right. Now she's here messing up my chances with the second male lead. Why is she so annoying? But I think tonight is when she's supposed to slip something into my drink. Good thing I already switched the glasses earlier. When she offers me a drink, I'll just let her get a taste of her own medicine. I raised an eyebrow, a glint of amusement in my eyes as I looked at her. She wasn't wrong. I had indeed tampered with the drinks. Only, the drug wasn't meant for her. My gaze drifted past Gwen. Not far behind her, Quentin was smiling as he clinked glasses with Bernard. As I watched him drink the wine, I couldn't help but let a hint of amusement creep into my eyes. My silence made Gwen uneasy. Almost eagerly, she handed me a glass of wine. Lucille, I didn't know my place when I first arrived and ended up offending you. Let me raise a toast to you tonight. I hope you can forgive me. I glanced at the clear liquid in the glass, then at the anxious Gwen. The corners of my lips curled up slightly. Then, under her watchful gaze, I obediently took a sip. Not long after, I used the excuse of feeling dizzy and went upstairs to rest in a guest room on the 3rd floor. But no sooner had I stepped into the guest room than a pair of large hands wrapped tightly around me from behind. The familiar scent of gardenia on the man made me chuckle before I could stop myself. What are you doing up here, brooding second male lead? Emery LeBlanc rested his chin on my shoulder with a pitiful pout and instinctively held me even tighter. Lulu, stop teasing me. If you hadn't asked me to play nice with Gwen, I wouldn't have paid anyone else any attention. And why do you smell like that jerk Quentin's cologne? Has he been sneaking around behind my back again? Lulu, Quentin's a piece of trash. How about you take a look at me instead? With that, he whimpered and leaned toward me for a kiss. I pushed his face away in disdain. Move. If you make me miss the show today, I'll never speak to you again. Upon hearing this, Emery froze. Reluctant as he was, he obediently let go of me. But then he hung his head. His lips were pressed into a tight line, and his eyes had already reddened. I couldn't help but soften when I saw him like that. I leaned down and pressed a kiss to the corner of his lips. But before I could say anything to comfort him, I heard the door of the room next door close. The next moment, a muffled groan came through the wall. Emery and I exchanged a look, and we both smiled. The show had finally begun. Move. If you make me miss the show today, I'll never speak to you again. Upon hearing this, Emery froze. Reluctant as he was, he obediently let go of me. But then he hung his head. His lips were pressed into a tight line, and his eyes had already reddened. I couldn't help but soften when I saw him like that. I leaned down and pressed a kiss to the corner of his lips. But before I could say anything to comfort him, I heard the door of the room next door close. The next moment, a muffled groan came through the wall. Emery and I exchanged a look, and we both smiled. The show had finally begun. By the time Gwen brought her new friends upstairs, the two people in the room were already in the throes of passion. The moment Gwen heard the obscene sounds coming from inside, she called for security to kick the door down without the slightest hesitation. The next second, the group of onlookers was met with the sight of two bodies tangled together. Gwen completely broke down. "Dad? How could it be you? What are you doing? Have you lost your mind?" Snapped back to reality by the shock, scrambled Bernard to pull the covers over himself in a panic.
No.
This was an accident. None of you are to breathe a word of this. It was all an accident. Gwen broke down in tears. She turned and ran straight out, leaving Bernard alone to be gawked at by the crowd. It became a huge scandal. No sooner had Bernard gotten dressed than the furious Mrs. Strickland threw him out of the banquet. Despite his desperate attempts to suppress the scandal, the gossip about a wealthy family's son-in-law being a bottom in an affair still trended on Instagram. As the mastermind behind the whole spectacle, I lay in Emery's arms, laughing so hard that I could barely sit up as I scrolled through the news. My phone rang. It was Mom. The moment I answered, her resigned voice came through the line. "Lucille, you were behind this." I immediately straightened up. "Mom, Bernard had the audacity to bring his illegitimate daughter into our home. I just wanted to teach him a little lesson."
"What?
"Were you worried that I'd scold you?" Mom asked with a laugh. "Silly girl. No matter what you do to him, I'll have your back. I just wanted you to know that compared to reputation, wealth is what truly matters. I'm going to shut down several of the Herman family's projects. You'll be in charge of the follow-up dealings. Don't disappoint
Me."
My eyes lit up instantly. "Love you, Mom." I hung up the phone and moved to get up and open my laptop, but Emery pulled me back into his arms. He nuzzled against my neck like a cat. "Lulu, my family just launched a new project on the west side of the city. Tell me you love me, and I'll give it to you." If Logan was my lapdog, then Emery was more like a pet cat. In the original story, he was the tragic, devoted second male lead even though he was born into a wealthy family and should have been the golden child. The story decided otherwise. Emery lost both parents in a car accident, and his legs were so severely fractured that he'd never walk again. Later on, after falling in love with Gwen, he'd shower her with money and resources, but because of his physical disability, he never dared to confess his feelings. He could only stand by and watch the woman he loved fly off into the sunset with Quentin. But how could I allow anyone to help Gwen? Thus, I took the initiative to seek out Emery, with the intention of eliminating him first. Yet, when I found him, he was being cornered and beaten by a group of kids. He was already frail to begin with, the type who always seemed unwell. At that moment, huddled in a corner, he looked even more pitiful. I couldn't stand watching it any longer, so I knocked the kid picking on him flat with one kick. The kids initially turned to come after me, but after seeing the bodyguards standing behind me, they scattered like startled birds. After that, Emery voluntarily became my loyal sidekick. He gave me his family's heirloom pearl necklace and came looking for me every day with eager, hopeful eyes. At first, I didn't want to have anything to do with him. After all, his identity as the devoted second male lead made him seem like a ticking time bomb no matter how I looked at it. That was until I was crossing the street one day and encountered a drunk driver. It was Emery who noticed something was wrong and saved me in the nick of time. Only then did I finally let my guard down around him. As a way of returning the favor, I helped him escape the fate of losing both his parents. But he was quite messed up in the head too. After learning that he ended up crippled and wheelchair-bound in the original story, he voluntarily started using a wheelchair himself. Every day, he'd use some made-up ailment as an excuse to cozy up to me and act cute. There was a period when I was busy with student council affairs and didn't have time to reply to his messages, so he went and deliberately soaked in cold water until he got a high fever. Then, he called and pitifully begged me to keep him company. Just the thought of how he'd spent all these years using such little tricks to get my attention had me reaching over and pinching
His thigh.
Yet, instead of pulling away, he trembled beneath me and held me even tighter. His large palm settled on my waist, the heat of it searing against my skin. "Lulu, won't you show me some love?" he asked hoarsely, his eyes burning with undisguised desire. "In your dreams." Logan pushed the door open and entered with a bowl of fruit. At Emery's words, he let out a cold snort and looked at him with undisguised disdain. "Get lost, you cripple. Stop whoring yourself out here." Emery gave him a gentle smile. "A psycho like you has no right to talk to me after all this time. You still haven't fully taken down the Kennedy family. If I were you, I would have hung myself by now." Logan let out a mocking laugh. You think you could do better? After all this time, your family's still stuck in the same sorry state. Aren't you embarrassed? Seeing that the two of them were about to keep arguing, I stood up swiftly and gave each of them a slap. Over the years, these two had never once been able to be in the same room without clashing. If not for the fact that they were still useful to me, I would have kicked them both out long ago and found someone more obedient to keep around. I thought the slap would finally get them to behave. Instead, both of their eyes were flushed as they looked at me with a complex, yearning gaze. Master, slap me again. Lulu, slap me again. Tisk, I'd accidentally gotten them worked up instead. Before my second slap could land, my phone suddenly rang. I was greeted by the voice of my assistant Ian Baldwin. Miss Slater, we got a problem. A worker at the West Side site is threatening to jump, and it's being live-streamed online. I frowned and clicked on the link Ian had sent. The live stream already had over 2,000 viewers. A man in a yellow hard hat sat on the edge of the rooftop. His clothes were covered in dust, his skin cracked from years of exposure to the wind and sun. Tears and snot ran down his face as he sobbed into his phone, speaking in a thick accent. I've been working at this site for 6 months, and the foreman's been dragging his feet on my wages. Now my son is sick, so I went to ask for the money I'm owed. But he only gave me $2,000 and said I wasn't worth any more than that. I couldn't accept that, so he had some men beat me up. My son's in the hospital, and we can't afford the bills. If something happens to my boy, I don't want to live either. As he spoke, he inched closer to the edge. I furrowed my brows. After confirming that the worker's location was only 3 miles from where I was, I decisively got in the car and drove to the scene. Logan and Emery were concerned that I wouldn't be safe on my own, so they came along too. When the 3 of us reached the construction site on the west side of the city, the fire department was already there. But the worker stubbornly refused to come down. Through his tears, he explained to the firefighters, I can't come down. Unless the foreman gives me my money, I'd rather die. Instead of trying to calm him down, the foreman mocked from nearby, Go ahead and die if you want. It's not like your life's worth anything. If you jump, I'll actually think a little more of you. Let me tell you, you're only worth $2,000. So, take it or leave it. A slap landed, and the noisy crowd instantly fell silent. I wiped my hand in disgust, already regretting having hit the foreman myself. He flew into a rage. You little bitch, you actually dared to hit me? Do you know who my cousin is? I shot him a cold glance and let out a scornful laugh. It doesn't matter who your cousin is. What matters is who I am. What followed was easily resolved. Once I revealed my identity as the Slater family's heiress, everyone present was stunned. I announced that my family would cover the medical expenses for the worker's son. On top of that, we'd also go after the foreman to make sure all back wages were paid in full to the workers. I looked straight into the camera on the workers' live stream and made a solemn promise. Slater Group takes full responsibility for this management failure. Going forward, we will strengthen personnel oversight and work hard to prevent such situations from happening again. Slater Group has always emphasized putting people first. We respect every working individual and will never tolerate wage arrears. Seeing the sincerity in my eyes, the worker hesitated for a moment before finally agreeing to come down from the edge. Without a second thought, I transferred $100,000 to him to cover his son's medical expenses. When he saw the money in his bank account, the worker broke down in tears again. Oh, thank you, Miss Slater. I gave him a warm smile and had Ian, who just arrived at the scene, take him to the hospital to see his son. The incident quickly became a trending topic on local news. My quick actions caused Slater Group's stock price to rise rather than fall. But I knew this was far from over. Through Logan's investigation, I discovered that the foreman who had been withholding the workers' wages was none other than Bernard's distant cousin, Cedric Lane. Following that thread, we uncovered several other people Bernard had planted within the company. They were like bugs hiding in the shadows, trying to gnaw away at Slater Group's wealth. Unfortunately for them, I had never been one to tolerate such things quietly. After I fired the last of Bernard's people, he came to find me. His eyes were bloodshot, and he looked utterly haggard. Lucille, did you really have to go this far? Even your mother never interfered with me all these years. Was it necessary to wipe out everything I had? I sat on the couch, not even bothering to look up as I admired my freshly done nails. What my mother does is her business. I'm my own person. If something pisses me off, I get rid of it. What can you do about it? Besides, if I hadn't stepped in when I did, Slater Group stock price would have tanked. Do you really think my mother would have kept a liability like you around then? Bernard was left completely speechless. After glaring at me with a mix of shame and fury, he turned and stormed out, slamming the door behind him. Instead of looking up, I continued examining my manicure. Truth be told, there was more to the incident than met the eye. That worker was usually honest and dependable. He only ended up live streaming a suicide attempt because someone had manipulated him into it. Someone had told him that if he went live and tarnished Slater Group's reputation, they would give him a large sum of money. But because I showed up, the whole thing fell apart. After reviewing the surveillance footage, I discovered that the man who had spoken to the worker was actually an employee of Kennedy Group. Since Logan was my loyal lapdog, the one behind this was most likely Quentin. At the thought of the private investigator's latest report that Gwen had gotten in touch with Quentin, I was overcome with a sense of foreboding. Sure enough, I received a call from Emery a couple of days later. Logan had gone missing. According to Emery, he had recently been working on a joint project with Kennedy Group, which was supposed to be handled by Logan. But when the time came to sign the contract today, Quentin had shown up instead. Since Logan and Emery presented themselves as strangers to the public, Emery couldn't very well ask about Logan's whereabouts. Instead, he could only call to inform me. I wasn't too worried, though. After awakening, I'd installed tracking systems on all 3 of our phones precisely to prevent situations like kidnapping. As expected, it didn't take long for the technician to pinpoint Logan's location. He was in an abandoned factory on the outskirts of the city. Without much hesitation, I drove straight to the factory. The factory door was slightly ajar. After I pushed it open, I saw Logan tied to a chair in the center of the building. He had likely been drugged, as he was unconscious and slumped limply in the chair. Only after I kicked him did he stir awake with a frown. The moment he saw me, Logan snapped fully awake and shouted at me urgently, "Forget about me. Get out of here now." Before I could react, a voice came from behind.
Me.
Quentin let out a soft laugh and said in a low voice, "So, you're the one behind Logan." I knew there was no way someone like him, who is just a useless loser in the original story, could have gotten back into the Kennedy family so quickly, let alone landed multiple projects. Turns out he had you to thank for all of it, Miss Slater. I turned around and positioned myself in front of Logan. Then, I fixed a cold stare at the awakened original male lead. So, what if it was me? Just because you're useless doesn't mean everyone else is. That clearly struck a nerve because Quentin immediately stopped smiling. After one of his projects blew up, some members of the board had grown dissatisfied with him. Desperate to prove himself, he'd set his sights on the shopping mall project on the west side of the city. Since Slater Group was Kennedy Group's biggest competitor, it naturally became his target. But I'd thwarted those plans and Logan had gone on to secure the LeBlanc family's project instead. When Quentin heard the board members call him useless once again, he suddenly awakened to the memories of being the male lead. Only then did he realize that he was supposed to be the protagonist of the story, and Logan was meant to be nothing more than his foil. It was Logan's deviation from the original plot that had turned Quentin's life upside down. He was supposed to be adored by all and stand at the pinnacle of power. The crushing weight of that loss drove Quentin to completely snap. And now, I, the one responsible for changing the story, had dared to call him useless to his face. Quentin's eyes darkened sinisterly. He stepped forward and grabbed me by the throat, his grip tightening gradually. "Lucille, all you can do now is run your mouth. This place is rigged with explosives. When the timer runs out, this entire factory will be reduced to rubble. To be honest, I didn't want to go this far. But you people just had to stray from the original plot. If you had simply followed the story and served as my stepping stones, none of you would have had to suffer like this. You brought this on yourselves." I couldn't help but laugh at what Quentin said. "You make it sound like you would have spared us in the original story. Don't make me say Quentin, whether it's in the original plot or now, you've always been nothing but an ungrateful, selfish piece of trash. Not only did you steal someone else's place, but you also needed to ride Gwen's coattails just to take down the Kennedy family. You're absolutely vile." The look in Quentin's eyes shifted. He started squeezing harder. Clearly, he truly intended to kill me. He was strangling me so hard that I couldn't breathe. I fought with everything I had to get out of his grasp. Just as I was on the verge of blacking out from lack of oxygen, the hands around my neck suddenly loosened. The next second, Quentin collapsed to the ground in front of me. And standing behind him was Emery, holding a stun gun. Quentin was taken away by the police. With all the evidence against him, it was all but certain that he would be convicted. The bomb was successfully defused, and the three of us went to the police station with the officers to give our statements. After everything was finally over, I was about to head back to the company to handle some matters for a project. But no sooner had I gotten into the car than a knife was at my throat. It was Gwen. She looked much more haggard than the last time I'd seen her. Her hair was a mess and there were tear tracks at the corners of her eyes. Her hand trembled as she gripped the knife. "Why you have to get Quentin out or I'll kill you." I took a deep breath and did my best to stay calm. "Gwen, don't do anything stupid. If you stop now you can still go on living as my family's adopted daughter." But Gwen broke into tears and said in a choked-up voice, "Don't lie to me, Lucille. You've awakened too, haven't you? You know Quentin is the male lead. And if a novel loses its male lead, how can a female lead even exist? Quentin told me everything. The only way to restore the original plot is to get rid of you and Logan. Lucille, I really don't want to hurt you, but I can't go back to the life I had before. Only if everything returns to how it was meant to be. Can I dash?" Before she could finish, I cut her off. "Who told you a novel has to have a male lead?" Gwen froze for a moment. Even though she didn't answer, I could hear the doubt forming in her mind. "Gwen, I think you've gotten one thing wrong. This is a female-centric beloved by all novel, so shouldn't you be the one with the protagonist's plot armor? That being the case, shouldn't it be your choice who the male lead is?" Gwen's fingers trembled even more. But none of you are following the original plot anymore. Both the antagonist and the second male lead are on your side now. So what? I sighed. Since this isn't a beloved by all novel anymore, why don't you just turn it into a female lead story instead? Or a business drama? Gwen, we both have the right to change our own lives. If one path doesn't work, why not try another? Besides, you probably couldn't accept Quentin either, could you? Otherwise you wouldn't have kept helping us all those times he tried to take us down. Gwen slowly lowered the knife. Truth be told, I had a faint suspicion that Gwen had been helping me back when that worker threatened to jump from the rooftop. After all, in the original story, Ian and I didn't have much of a relationship. On the contrary, Gwen had once done him a favor, so he'd been doing her bidding ever since. Later, when Logan was tied up, I'd also noticed a distinct cut mark on the ropes binding him. Quentin wouldn't have been that kind-hearted, and the only person on his side who would secretly help was Gwen. But what finally confirmed her stance for me was her inner voice. From the moment I got into the car, I'd heard her screaming, "I'm sorry," over and over in her head. I was no saint. There was a time I wanted to take Gwen down too. However, I also wasn't a treacherous, ungrateful snake like Quentin. Since Gwen could never beat me anyway, I figured I'd give her a lifeline and let her owe me one. After all, a female lead's plot armor should theoretically extend some protection to the people around her too, right? I smirked at the thought. Sure enough, Gwen ultimately accepted my reasoning. After returning home, she locked herself in her room and refused to let anyone in. When she finally came out, she no longer had that pitiful, calculating demeanor she had before. Instead, she started trailing after me, always going Lucille this, Lucille that. She dressed it up nicely, saying she wanted to learn from me and strive to transform herself into the heroine of a female empowerment story. I didn't really care either way. After all, no matter how much she studied, she'd never be smarter than me. Emery and Logan, however, were less than thrilled. As soon as I wrapped up a project, they whisked me away for a getaway under the cover of the night. Basking in the warm sunlight, I lay back on a lounge chair and closed my eyes with a contented sigh. Not long ago, Quentin's trial had finally concluded. The court sentenced him to 10 years in prison and also stripped him of his political rights for life. I heard Quentin lost his mind the moment the verdict was read. He started shouting in the courtroom that he was the male lead, which so unnerved the court that they ordered a psychiatric evaluation. In the end, everything went back to normal and he was sent off to serve his sentence. The Kennedy family naturally had no intention of letting a convicted criminal inherit anything. After everything came to light, Kennedy Group was handed over entirely to Logan. On top of that, the police made another discovery. While looking into Quentin's connections, they found that Bernard had actually asked him to get rid of me. He'd even promised to marry Gwen off to him once it was done. When Gwen found out, she broke down crying in my arms. Although she didn't have much affection for the father who had never been there for her since she was young, she still felt a chill run through her at the thought that Bernard had been using her all along. But due to the lack of substantial evidence, Bernard wasn't arrested. Mom, however, wasted no time in throwing him out of the house after learning what he'd done. She had the foresight to never officially marry him in the first place. So, even though he was now being kicked out, he wouldn't be getting a single cent. I trembled with excitement just imagining the agony and resentment I'd see in their eyes whenever they looked at me. Truly, there was nothing more satisfying than watching the people you hated get what they deserved. Just then, Emery wrapped his arms around my waist and pressed a kiss to my right cheek pitifully. "Lulu, I'm your favorite, right?" Another pair of hands found my thigh. Logan gently nibbled on my earlobe, asking, "Master, you like me the most, don't you?" I let out a soft laugh and scratched both of them under the chin. "That depends on how you two perform." The breeze drifted by, and the sunlight was just right.